The sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty trail that wound through the vast Wyoming territory, its golden rays offering no respite to the lone figure stumbling along the path. Tabitha Price clutched her empty canteen with trembling fingers, her once fine traveling dress now tattered and stained from days of desperate travel. The year was 1876, and the promise of a teaching position in the frontier town of Willow Creek had drawn her west from Boston following the devastating loss of her parents to influenza. Now, that dream seemed as distant as the Eastern civilization she'd left behind. Her vision blurred as she forced one foot in front of the other. 3 days with barely any food or water had taken their toll. The stagecoach robbery had left her with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small locket containing her parents' portraits. Tabitha's knees buckled beneath her, the endless horizon swaying as darkness crept into the edges of her vision. Just a little further, she whispered to herself, her throat parched and raw, but her body had reached its limit. As the ground rushed up to meet her, Tabitha's last conscious thought was a prayer that someone might find her before the vultures did. Yancey Pratt pulled back on the reins of his chestnut quarter horse, halting the animal as his keen eyes spotted something unusual on the trail ahead. At 28, he'd spent enough time in this unforgiving country to know that anything out of the ordinary could mean trouble or someone in need of help. "Whoa there, Rusty," he murmured, squinting against the harsh sunlight. The shape on the ground was unmistakably human. Yancey dismounted swiftly, his worn leather boots raising little clouds of dust as he approached the prone figure. It was a woman, and from the looks of her, she wasn't from these parts. Her clothing, though dirty and torn, had once been fine, the kind worn by Eastern ladies. Kneeling beside her, Yancey gently turned her over, noting her pale, sunburned face and the dark circles beneath her closed eyes. "Miss, can you hear me?" he asked, pressing his fingers to her neck to find a pulse. It was there, but weak and fluttering like a trapped bird. Her skin was hot to the touch, and her lips were cracked from dehydration. Yancey uncorked his canteen and carefully lifted her head, dribbling a small amount of water between her parched lips. "Easy now," he murmured as she coughed weakly, her eyelids fluttering. Tabitha's consciousness returned slowly, the world materializing in fragments. First, the sensation of something cool and wet against her lips, then the blessed relief of water trickling down her throat. A shadow fell across her face, blocking the punishing sun, and she forced her eyes open to see a man leaning over her. He wore a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his features, but she could make out concerned blue eyes studying her intently. A cowboy, from the look of his weathered clothing and the horse that stood patiently nearby. "There you are," he said, his voice deep and gentle. "Can you tell me your name, miss?" She tried, but her voice failed her. She swallowed and tried again. Tabitha Price." "Miss Price, I'm Yancey Pratt. I've got a ranch about 5 miles from here." He offered her another sip of water, careful not to let her drink too quickly. "What happened to you, stagecoach?" "Robbed," she managed, each word an effort. 3 days ago, no food, walking to Willow Creek." Understanding dawned in Yancey's eyes. "The Dixon gang," he said grimly. "They've been hitting stages all through this territory." He looked at her more closely, noting the signs of severe hunger and exhaustion. "When's the last time you ate, Miss Price?" Tabitha tried to remember. "A crust of bread. Yesterday morning." Without hesitation, Yancey slid his arms beneath her shoulders and knees, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. Her head fell against his chest, too weak to hold herself upright. "You'll never starve again," he said with quiet determination as he carried her to his horse. "Not while I have anything to say about it." He settled her onto Rusty's back before mounting behind her, one strong arm keeping her secure against his chest as he took the reins with his free hand. Tabitha wanted to protest, to maintain some semblance of propriety, but she lacked the strength. Instead, she surrendered to the strange comfort of this stranger's protection, letting the steady rhythm of the horse's gait lull her into a half-conscious state. The journey to Yancey's ranch passed in a blur for Tabitha. Occasionally, he would rouse her enough to take small sips of water, his voice a constant reassurance in her ear. "Stay with me, Miss Price, not much further now." True to his word, the silhouette of a modest but well-maintained ranch house soon appeared on the horizon. As they drew closer, Tabitha could make out a barn, corral, and several outbuildings, all signs of a prosperous small ranch. Smoke curled invitingly from the chimney. A woman emerged from the house as they approached, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun. She hurried toward them as Yancey carefully dismounted with Tabitha in his arms. "Yancey, what in heaven's name?" "Found her collapsed on the Dixon Pass Trail, Mrs. Whitaker," Yancey explained. "Stagecoach robbery victim. She's been without food for days." The woman's weathered face softened with concern. "Bring her inside, quickly, I'll heat some broth." Mrs. Whitaker turned out to be Yancey's housekeeper, a widow who had been with the Pratt family since Yancey was a boy. She clucked and fussed as Yancey placed Tabitha on a comfortable bed in a small but clean room. "Poor lamb," Mrs. Whitaker murmured, already loosening Tabitha's boots. "You rest easy now, I'll take care of you." Yancey hovered in the doorway, his tall frame nearly filling it. "I'll ride into town for the doctor," he said, his eyes not leaving Tabitha's face. "No need to trouble yourself," Tabitha protested weakly. "I just need food and rest." "Nonsense," said Mrs. Whitaker firmly. "You're suffering from exposure and starvation, miss. We'll have Doc Wilson look you over and that's that." Yancey nodded in agreement. "I'll be back before sundown. Mrs. Whitaker will see to your needs until then." As promised, Mrs. Whitaker helped Tabitha into a clean nightgown, one of her own, though it hung loosely on Tabitha's starved frame, and served her small portions of beef broth and soft bread. By the time Yancey returned with the doctor, Tabitha was feeling marginally more human, though still desperately weak. Dr. Wilson was a kind-faced man in his 50s who examined her with professional efficiency. "Dehydration, exhaustion, and the early stages of starvation," he diagnosed. "You're lucky Mr. Pratt found you when he did, Miss Price. Another day in that sun without food or water." He left the sentence unfinished, but the implication was clear. Tabitha had been close to death. She'll need rest, plenty of fluids, and small, frequent meals to build her strength back, Dr. Wilson instructed Mrs. Whitaker. "Nothing too rich at first. Her body needs to remember how to accept nourishment." After the doctor left, Yancey appeared in the doorway of the guest room, his hat in his hands. "May I come in, Miss Price?" Tabitha nodded, suddenly conscious of her appearance and the impropriety of receiving a bachelor while dressed in nightclothes, regardless of the circumstances. She pulled the quilt higher. "Doctor says you'll recover fully with proper care," Yancey said, remaining respectfully near the door. "I want you to know you're welcome to stay here as long as necessary." "You're very kind, Mr. Pratt, but I couldn't impose," Tabitha said. "I was on my way to Willow Creek. There's a teaching position waiting for me." Yancey's expression shifted slightly. "School teacher, are you?" "Well, Willow Creek will still be there when you're strong enough to travel, and I insist it's no imposition. Mrs. Whitaker could use the company." "I have no way to repay your kindness," Tabitha admitted, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "The robbers took everything I had." Yancey waved away her concern. "We don't keep ledgers for decent human behavior out here, Miss Price. Rest now. We can talk more tomorrow." That night, as Tabitha drifted between sleep and wakefulness, she found herself thinking of Yancey Pratt's blue eyes and the gentle strength with which he'd carried her. "You'll never starve again," he'd promised. In her fragile state, those words had wrapped around her heart like a warm blanket. Morning brought the smell of coffee and bacon. Tabitha found herself ravenously hungry for the first time in days. Mrs. Whitaker helped her dress in a simple calico dress, another of the housekeepers, altered hastily to better fit Tabitha's slender frame, and led her to the kitchen where a modest but hearty breakfast awaited. "Mr. Pratt's been out since dawn," Mrs. Whitaker explained as she poured coffee. Ranch work waits for no one, especially with only him and young Billy Johnson to manage it all. Only 2 men run this entire ranch? Tabitha asked, surprised. Mrs. Whittaker nodded. It's not one of the big cattle operations. Yancey raises horses, mostly finest quarter horses in the territory. His father started the business and Yancey took over when Henry passed 5 years back. Tabitha sipped her coffee, savoring the rich warmth. He seems very capable. That he is, Mrs. Whittaker agreed with obvious affection. Works harder than any man I know, too hard if you ask me. Never takes time for himself. She gave Tabitha a considering look. It's nice having another woman around the place. The days that followed fell into a pleasant rhythm. Tabitha regained her strength gradually, moving from the bed to a chair by the window, then to short walks around the ranch house. Mrs. Whittaker proved to be excellent company, forthright, kind, and full of stories about the territory. Yancey himself was often absent during daylight hours, busy with the never-ending work of the ranch. But he made a point of checking on Tabitha each evening, sometimes bringing wildflowers or an interesting stone he'd found while riding the property. A week after her arrival, Tabitha felt strong enough to venture to the corral where Yancey was working with a spirited young mare. She watched from the fence as he moved with confident ease around the nervous animal, his voice a constant, soothing murmur. "You have a way with them," she observed when he noticed her presence. Yancey smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "Horses are honest creatures. They respond to patience and consistency." He patted the mare's neck and approached the fence. "You're looking better. Getting your color back." "I feel much improved," Tabitha said. "Thanks to you and Mrs. Whittaker." "Mrs. Whittaker does most of the fussing," Yancey said modestly. "I just found you and carried me," Tabitha reminded him softly, "and promised I'd never starve again." A flush crept up Yancey's neck, visible even beneath his tan. "Well, I meant it." Their eyes held for a moment too long before Yancey cleared his throat. "I was thinking if you're feeling up to it, maybe tomorrow I could show you around the property. There's a nice spot by the creek that's cool even on hot days like this." "I'd like that very much," Tabitha replied, surprised by how much she meant it. The next day dawned clear and bright. After breakfast, Yancey saddled 2 horses, Rusty for himself and a gentle mare named Daisy for Tabitha. "She's steady as they come," he assured her. "Do you ride, Miss Price?" "I've had some lessons," Tabitha admitted. Though Boston riding schools hardly prepare one for Western trails, Yancey helped her mount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. The brief contact sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach. As they rode side by side away from the ranch buildings, Tabitha found herself studying his profile, the strong jaw, straight nose, and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Tell me about Boston," Yancey requested as they followed a well-worn trail through a meadow dotted with wildflowers. "I've never been east of the Mississippi." Tabitha described her life in the city, her father's position as a professor of literature, her mother's involvement in social causes, the comfortable brownstone where she'd grown up surrounded by books and ideas. "It sounds like you had a good upbringing," Yancey observed. "I was fortunate," Tabitha agreed, "until the influenza came last winter." She swallowed hard against the sudden tightness in her throat. "They died within days of each other. I was left with the house, which I sold to pay debts, and enough money for passage west and a new start." "I'm sorry for your loss," Yancey said quietly. "I know something of what it's like to lose parents." "Mrs. Whittaker mentioned your father passed 5 years ago," Tabitha ventured. Yancey nodded. "And my mother when I was 14, childbirth. The baby, my little sister, didn't survive either." "How terrible for you," Tabitha said, her heart aching for the boy he'd been. "Life out here can be harsh," Yancey said matter-of-factly, "but it teaches you to appreciate what and who you have while you have them." They rode in companionable silence for a while before Yancey pointed to a copse of cottonwood trees ahead. "There's the creek. We'll rest the horses there." The spot was as lovely as he'd promised, a clear, burbling stream shaded by the spreading branches of ancient trees. Wildflowers grew in profusion along the banks, and birds called to one another overhead. Yancey spread a blanket on the ground and produced a simple lunch from his saddlebags: bread, cheese, apples, and a jar of Mrs. Whittaker's preserves. As they ate, Tabitha found herself relaxing completely for the first time since leaving Boston. "It's beautiful here," she said, trailing her fingers in the cool water. "So different from what I imagined the West would be like." "What did you imagine?" Yancey asked, leaning back on his elbows, his long legs stretched out before him. "Endless desert, I suppose, lawless towns, wild Indians around every corner." She laughed at her own naivety. "Eastern newspapers paint quite a dramatic picture." "There's plenty of that too," Yancey admitted. "But there's also this." He gestured to the peaceful scene around them. "A lot of beauty if you know where to look." His eyes met hers, and Tabitha felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer sun. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility, until a fish jumped in the stream, breaking the spell. Yancey cleared his throat. "So, this teaching position in Willow Creek, is it still waiting for you?" The question brought Tabitha back to reality with a jolt. In the comfort of her recovery at the Pratt Ranch, she'd almost forgotten her purpose in coming west. "Yes, I imagine so. The school board was quite eager to secure a teacher with formal education." She fiddled with a blade of grass. "I should write to them, actually, to explain my delay." "Of course," Yancey said, his expression carefully neutral. "Next time I ride into town, I'll post a letter for you." On the ride back to the ranch, Tabitha found herself seeing the landscape with new eyes, appreciating the way the sunlight gilded the rolling hills, the stark beauty of distant mountains, the freedom of open space stretching to the horizon. And beside her rode Yancey Pratt, a man as solid and dependable as the land itself. That evening, Tabitha penned a letter to the Willow Creek School Board, explaining her circumstances and inquiring if the position was still available. She sealed it with a sense of duty rather than enthusiasm, surprising herself with the realization. Life at the ranch continued pleasantly as Tabitha's strength fully returned. She began helping Mrs. Whittaker with household tasks, finding satisfaction in the simple rhythms of ranch life. She learned to make sourdough bread, to preserve the vegetables from the kitchen garden, and even to milk the 2 cows that provided dairy for the household. Yancey rode into town with her letter and returned 2 days later with news that unsettled their peaceful arrangement. "The school board replied by telegraph," he said that evening as they sat on the porch after supper. "They're still holding the position for you, but they need you in Willow Creek by the end of the month if you want it." The end of the month was just over 2 weeks away. Tabitha twisted her hands in her lap. "I see." Mrs. Whittaker, sensing the tension, excused herself to wash the dishes, leaving them alone in the gathering twilight. "I suppose I should make arrangements to travel to Willow Creek," Tabitha said, though the words felt hollow. Yancey nodded, his face unreadable in the fading light. "I could take you. It's a 2-day ride from here, but the roads are safer now. The territorial marshal caught up with the Dixon gang last week." "That's good news," Tabitha said absently, her mind whirling with conflicting emotions. The teaching position had been her goal, her reason for traveling west. Yet now the thought of leaving the ranch, of leaving Yancey, filled her with unexpected sadness. Unless. Yancey began, then stopped. "Unless," Tabitha prompted, her heart quickening. Yancey stood abruptly and moved to the porch railing, his back to her. "It's not fair of me to suggest alternatives. You came west with a purpose, and I respect that." Tabitha rose and moved to stand beside him, drawn by the tension in his shoulders. "Mr. Pratt Yancey, I'd like to hear what you were going to say." He turned to face her, his expression a mixture of determination and vulnerability that made her breath catch. "I've grown accustomed to having you here, Miss Price, more than accustomed. I look forward to seeing you each day." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort. What I'm trying to say, poorly, is that I'd like you to consider staying. Staying, Tabitha repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Here, as what? Yancey took a deep breath. As whatever you wish to be. Mrs. Whittaker could use the help, certainly. The ranch accounts could benefit from someone with your education, and Willow Creek isn't the only place that needs teaching. There are half a dozen children within riding distance who get no schooling at all. He reached for her hand, his touch gentle but sure. I'm not offering charity, Tabitha. I'm offering a place where you're valued, where you belong. The use of her given name sent a thrill through her. And is that all you're offering, Yancey? She asked, finding courage she didn't know she possessed. His eyes darkened as he stepped closer. No, he said softly, not all, but I wouldn't presume, Tabitha interrupted, surprising them both. Please. Something shifted in Yancey's expression, uncertainty, giving way to a quiet joy that transformed his features. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, a question more than a demand. But when Tabitha's arms slid up around his neck, Yancey pulled her closer, deepening the kiss with a passion that left her breathless. When they finally parted, he rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since the day you started looking at me instead of through me, he admitted. Tabitha smiled, her heart too full for words. She'd come west seeking a new beginning, never imagining it would take such an unexpected form. The next morning, Tabitha wrote another letter to the Willow Creek School Board, declining the position with genuine regret, but explaining she had found another calling. Yancey posted it himself, returning with supplies for the small schoolroom they planned to establish in an unused outbuilding on the ranch property. News of the school spread quickly through the scattered homesteads of the area. Within days, Tabitha had visits from 3 families, each eager to enroll their children in Miss Price's school, as it was already being called. 7 students to start, she told Yancey excitedly as they worked together to construct simple desks from lumber he'd brought from town. Ages 6 to 14. And Mrs. Peterson asked if I might teach her to read as well. She never had the chance as a child. Yancey smiled at her enthusiasm. You've brought something special to this valley, Tabitha, something we didn't even know was missing. She blushed at the warmth in his voice. I think I'm the one who found something I didn't know I was looking for. Their courtship progressed with the straightforward honesty that characterized the West. Yancey was a man of action rather than flowery words, but Tabitha discovered that his quiet demonstrations of care spoke louder than any poetry. He built bookshelves for her growing collection of teaching materials, rode miles to find particular wildflowers she'd admired, and listened with genuine interest to her ideas for the school. Mrs. Whittaker watched their blossoming relationship with undisguised approval. About time that boy found someone to share his life with, she told Tabitha one afternoon as they prepared supper. He works too hard to be alone. We haven't discussed marriage, Tabitha said, though the thought had certainly crossed her mind. Mrs. Whittaker gave her a knowing look. Haven't you now? Then what's all this nesting about, building a schoolroom, fixing up the east wing of the house that's been closed since his mother died? She shook her head. He may not have said the words yet, but that man is preparing a life for 2, clear as day. Tabitha couldn't deny the evidence. In the month since she'd decided to stay, the ranch had undergone subtle but significant changes. The parlor, long used only for storage, had been cleaned and furnished with comfortable chairs and a small piano ordered from Denver. The garden had been expanded, flowering plants added among the vegetables. And the east wing, as Mrs. Whittaker noted, was being systematically restored. New wallpaper, repaired floorboards, fresh paint. When Yancey finally proposed, it was in typical straightforward fashion. They were riding the property line, checking fences, a task Tabitha had come to enjoy for the time. It gave them alone together when he reined his horse to a stop atop a rise overlooking the ranch buildings below. I want to show you something, he said, dismounting and helping her down from Daisy. From his pocket, he produced a folded piece of paper that proved to be a rough architectural sketch. "I've been thinking about additions to the house," he explained. "A proper schoolroom attached to the main building so you wouldn't have to trudge through snow in winter. And here," he pointed to another section of the drawing, a larger kitchen. "Mrs. Whittaker's been complaining about the current one for years." Tabitha studied the drawing with interest. "It's a wonderful plan. The covered walkway between the house and the barn is especially practical." "And this," Yancey continued, his finger tracing a section of the sketch that showed a second-story addition, "would be our private quarters if you wanted them to be." Tabitha's head snapped up, her eyes meeting his. "Our quarters." Yancey took her hands in his expression earnest. "I'm not a sophisticated man, Tabitha. I can't offer you opera houses or literary salons, but I can offer you this land, this home, and every beat of my heart for as long as I live." He swallowed hard. "I love you. Will you marry me?" Tears sprang to Tabitha's eyes as joy welled up inside her. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes." Yancey's face broke into a smile of such radiance that it nearly stopped her heart. He lifted her off her feet in an exuberant embrace, spinning her around as she laughed through her tears. When he set her down, he kissed her with a tenderness that made her knees weak. "I have something for you," he said when they parted. From his pocket, he produced a small velvet pouch. "It was my mother's. My father gave it to her when they homesteaded this land." Inside was a gold ring set with a modest diamond flanked by 2 small sapphires. "It's beautiful," Tabitha breathed as Yancey slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "Not half as beautiful as you," Yancey said, his voice husky with emotion. They were married 3 weeks later in the town of Silver Creek, the nearest settlement with a proper church. The ceremony was small but joyful, attended by Mrs. Whittaker, Yancey's ranch hand Billy, and several neighboring families whose children attended Tabitha's school. Tabitha wore a dress of pale blue silk that Mrs. Whittaker had helped her sew, with lace at the collar and cuffs that had been carefully removed from her mother's wedding gown, the only item of value she'd kept with her during her journey west. Yancey, dressed in his best suit, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked down the short aisle on the arm of Mr. Peterson, a neighboring rancher who had kindly offered to stand in for her father. "I, Yancey, take thee, Tabitha, to be my wedded wife," he said clearly, his voice steady with certainty. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part." When Tabitha repeated the vows, her voice trembled with emotion but never faltered. The simple gold band Yancey placed beside her engagement ring felt right, as if it had always belonged there. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the minister said, beaming at the couple. "You may kiss your bride." Yancey's kiss was respectful but heartfelt, a promise of all that was to come. As they turned to face their small gathering of well-wishers, Tabitha felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she belonged, not in a boarding house in Willow Creek, but here, with this man, building a life together on the frontier. The wedding celebration continued at the ranch, where Mrs. Whittaker had prepared a feast that would be talked about for months to come. Tables had been set up in the yard, decorated with wildflowers and candles against the gathering dusk. Someone produced a fiddle, and soon laughter and music filled the air as neighbors who had few opportunities for socializing made the most of the occasion. As twilight deepened into night, Yancey found Tabitha watching the dancers from the edge of the lamplight. He offered his hand with a smile. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Pratt?" The sound of her new name sent a thrill through Tabitha. "You may indeed, Mr. Pratt," she replied, placing her hand in his. They moved together to the lilting melody, their bodies finding a natural harmony. "Happy," Yancey murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "Completely," Tabitha assured him, her heart so full it felt it might overflow. "And you?" "I never knew it was possible to be this happy," he admitted. "When I found you on that road, I thought I was just doing what anyone would do. I had no idea I was finding my future." Later, when the guests had departed and Mrs. Whitaker had tactfully retired to her cottage at the edge of the property. Yancey led Tabitha to their bedroom, the master's suite in the east wing that they had prepared together. Candles cast a warm glow over the room, and a vase of wildflowers sat on the dresser, filling the air with their subtle fragrance. "Welcome home," Yancey said softly, closing the door behind them. Any nervousness Tabitha might have felt about the wedding night dissolved in the tenderness of Yancey's gaze. Here was the man who had promised she would never starve again, not for food, not for security, and most certainly not for love. Their first night together as husband and wife was a discovery of each other, unhurried and filled with whispered words of love and gentle laughter. Tabitha found in Yancey's arms a passion matched with reverence that made her feel both cherished and desired. As they lay together in the quiet aftermath, her head on his chest and his arms wrapped securely around her, Tabitha knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home. The seasons turned, bringing changes to the Pratt Ranch. The additions Yancey had planned were completed before the first snow fell. A proper schoolroom attached to the main house, an expanded kitchen that made Mrs. Whitaker smile every time she entered it, and private quarters for the newlyweds that offered both comfort and privacy. Tabitha's school flourished, growing to 12 students by the following spring. She found deep satisfaction in teaching not only the basics of reading, writing, and arithmetic, but also in sharing her love of literature and history with eager young minds. 3 times a week, after the children had gone home, she held classes for adults who wished to improve their education. Mrs. Peterson, who was now proudly reading simple books on her own, Billy the ranch hand, who wanted to learn enough mathematics to someday have his own spread, and 2 young women from neighboring farms who dreamed of becoming nurses. Yancey supported her endeavors wholeheartedly, building additional desks as needed and even joining the evening classes occasionally to learn about subjects that interested him. "I never had much formal schooling," he admitted to Tabitha. "My father believed in learning by doing." But there's something to be said for books too. Together, they built a life rich in purpose and affection. Their days were filled with work. The never-ending tasks of ranch life mingled with the responsibilities of the school, but their evenings were their own, spent in conversation, reading aloud to each other, or simply enjoying the companionable silence that comes with deep understanding. When Tabitha discovered she was expecting their first child, 6 months after their wedding, Yancey's joy was boundless. He insisted on hiring additional help for the ranch so he could be more available to her, and he spent hours carefully crafting a cradle from wood he'd saved from his own childhood home. "My father made one for me," he explained as he worked, his large hands surprisingly deft with the delicate carving. "And his father before him. It's a family tradition." Tabitha, watching him work with love evident in every careful stroke of his tools, felt a wave of gratitude for the circumstances that had brought her to this place, to this man. The stagecoach robbery that had seemed like disaster had led her to a happiness she could never have imagined. Their daughter, Emily Grace Pratt, was born on a clear spring morning with Mrs. Whitaker and the local midwife in attendance. Yancey paced the hallway outside their bedroom, his face pale with worry until the thin, indignant cry of his newborn daughter pierced the air. When Mrs. Whitaker finally opened the door to admit him, he approached the bed with such reverence that Tabitha's heart swelled with love. "Meet your daughter," she said softly, pulling back the blanket to reveal the tiny, perfect face. Yancey's hands trembled as he reached out to touch the downy head. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "Like her mother. Would you like to hold her?" Tabitha asked. The look of terror that crossed Yancey's face made her laugh despite her exhaustion. "I might break her," he protested. "Nonsense," Tabitha said. "She's stronger than she looks. All women are." Carefully, as if handling the most fragile porcelain, Yancey took his daughter into his arms. The baby squirmed, then settled, one tiny fist escaping the blanket to wrap instinctively around his finger. The expression on Yancey's face, wonder, love, and fierce protectiveness all mingled together, was one Tabitha knew she would remember all her days. "Hello, Emily," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm your pa, and I promise you'll never want for anything as long as I live." Life with a baby brought new challenges and joys to the Pratt household. Tabitha continued teaching, with Emily sleeping in a basket beside her desk, or being fussed over by the older girls who adored the infant. Yancey found every excuse to check on them throughout the day, his tough cowboy exterior softening visibly whenever his daughter was in his arms. Mrs. Whitaker, who had initially planned to retire and move to her sister's home in Oregon once Yancey was properly settled, announced that she couldn't possibly leave now. "Who would teach this child proper manners with you two besotted fools raising her?" she demanded, though her eyes twinkled as she said it. "Besides, someone has to make sure she knows how to bake a decent pie." As Emily grew from infant to toddler, the bonds of family strengthened around her. She had her mother's dark hair and her father's blue eyes, and a determined spirit that was entirely her own. By her first birthday, she was taking wobbly steps across the kitchen floor, reaching for the cookie jar that Mrs. Whitaker deliberately placed just out of reach. "She's going to be a handful," Yancey observed proudly as Emily toppled over, picked herself up without a whimper, and continued her determined quest. "Like someone else I know," Tabitha replied, leaning against her husband's side as they watched their daughter's efforts. The second year of their marriage brought both prosperity and challenges to the Pratt ranch. A harsh winter was followed by a particularly wet spring that led to excellent grazing conditions and a bumper crop from their expanded vegetable gardens. Yancey's horse breeding business thrived, with buyers coming from as far as Denver to purchase his well-trained quarter horses. But the same conditions that made for good crops also made for washed-out roads and swollen creeks. When a late spring flash flood swept away the bridge connecting their property to the main road to town, Yancey and Billy spent weeks rebuilding it, working from dawn to dusk to restore the vital connection. During this time, Tabitha took on more responsibilities around the ranch, managing the accounts and coordinating with neighboring ranchers to share resources until the bridge was restored. She discovered in herself a resilience and practical problem-solving ability that would have astonished her Boston acquaintances. "You've become quite the rancher's wife," Yancey observed one evening as she showed him the ledgers she'd organized in his absence. "Is that a good thing?" Tabitha asked, suddenly uncertain. She knew she was a far cry from the refined young lady who had left Boston 2 years earlier. Yancey pulled her into his arms, his expression serious. "It's a wonderful thing. You haven't just adapted to this life, Tabitha, you've embraced it, made it better." "Made me better?" He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I fall more in love with you every day." Their second child, a son they named Henry James Pratt after both their fathers, arrived as summer turned to autumn in their 3rd year of marriage. His birth was quicker and easier than Emily's had been, though no less miraculous to the parents who welcomed him. Emily, now 2.5, approached her baby brother with a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty. "Small," she declared after examining him closely. "Very small." "He'll grow," Yancey assured her, lifting her up to sit beside Tabitha on the bed. "Just like you did." Emily considered this, her small face serious. "I help," she decided. "I big sister." "Yes, you are," Tabitha agreed, her heart full as she looked at her family gathered around her. "And a very good one you'll be." As their family grew, so did the community around them. The school, which had begun with 7 students, now had 22, including children from 5 new families who had settled in the area. The territory was changing, becoming more established, with regular mail service and even talk of a railway spur that would connect to the main line 40 miles south. "Progress," Yancey said thoughtfully one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Henry sleeping in Tabitha's arms while Emily played with wooden blocks at their feet. "Part of me welcomes it better medical care, Easier travel, more opportunities for the children, but part of me fears losing something precious, Tabitha finished for him. The wildness, the freedom, the sense that this land is still being shaped by the people who live on it. Yancey nodded, grateful as always for her understanding. Exactly, but I suppose change is inevitable. Not all change, Tabitha said, reaching for his hand. Some things remain constant, his fingers tightened around hers. Like us. Like us, she agreed softly. As the years passed, the Pratt family and their ranch prospered. Yancey's reputation as a horse breeder grew, bringing business and connections that extended far beyond their small valley. Tabitha's school, now housed in a proper building in the growing settlement that had sprung up 5 miles from their ranch, was recognized by the Territorial Education Board as a model for rural education. Emily, at 7, was a bright, curious child with her mother's love of books and her father's affinity for horses. Henry, at 4, was quieter but equally determined, with a talent for making friends with every animal on the ranch from the barn cats to the most skittish colt. And there was a third child, now Catherine Ann, born in the 6th year of their marriage, a sunny-natured baby with red gold curls that neither parent could account for. Must be from your grandmother, Mrs. Whittaker suggested to Yancey. I remember your father mentioning she had hair like a sunset, as he put it. Life wasn't without its difficulties. There was the year a bout of equine distemper threatened the horse herd, requiring round-the-clock care and vigilance to prevent its spread. There was the winter Tabitha fell ill with pneumonia, leaving Yancey frantic with worry until her fever finally broke after 5 terrifying days. There were the inevitable disagreements that arise between two strong-willed people building a life together. But through it all, the foundation remained solid, a love that had begun with a simple act of kindness on a dusty road and grown into something enduring and true. On the 10th anniversary of the day Yancey had found Tabitha collapsed from hunger, they rode out together to the spot on the trail where their story had begun. The children were at home with Mrs. Whittaker, giving them a rare day to themselves. It looks so ordinary, Tabitha mused as they dismounted. Just another stretch of road, yet it changed everything for me. Yancey took her hand, his touch as familiar and necessary to her now as breathing. For me too. I rode this trail 1,000 times before that day, never knowing what was waiting. They spread a blanket beneath a cottonwood tree, much as they had on their first outing together all those years ago. This time, the picnic was more elaborate: cold chicken, fresh bread, summer berries, and a bottle of wine Yancey had been saving for the occasion. As they ate, they reminisced about the decade they'd shared, the challenges they'd overcome, the children they'd raised, the home they'd built together. The sun dappled through the leaves above them, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across the blanket. I have something for you, Yancey said when they had finished eating. From his pocket, he produced a small box. 10 years seemed worth marking properly. Inside was a pendant, a gold heart set with 3 small birthstones representing their children, suspended from a delicate chain. It's beautiful, Tabitha breathed, turning it to catch the light. Look at the back, Yancey urged. Tabitha turned the pendant over to find an inscription. You'll never starve for love. Tears sprang to her eyes as she looked up at her husband. A decade had added a few lines to his face, a touch of silver at his temples, but his eyes still held the same steadfast warmth that had been her anchor through all the changes of their life together. I never have, she whispered, not for a single day. Yancey helped her fasten the necklace, his fingers brushing the nape of her neck in a touch that still sent shivers down her spine. Nor will you ever, he promised, not while I'm alive to prevent it. Tabitha leaned into his embrace, marveling at how the years had only deepened their connection rather than diminishing it. They had grown together, shaped by the land and by each other, into something stronger and more enduring than either could have become alone. As they rode home in the golden light of late afternoon, Tabitha thought about the young woman she had been desperate, starving, on the verge of giving up. How could she have known that her lowest moment would lead to her greatest joy? That the cowboy who carried her to safety would carry her heart as well, treating both with equal care. The ranch came into view, smoke rising from the chimney, chickens scratching in the yard, the children's laughter floating on the breeze as they played some game with Mrs. Whitaker. Home in every sense of the word. Race you to the barn, Yancey challenged suddenly, his eyes alight with mischief. Tabitha laughed, the sound as free and joyful as her heart. "You're on," she replied, urging her horse forward. They thundered down the final stretch of road side by side, equals in all the ways that mattered, the future stretching before them as wide and promising as the western sky.